let somebody go, I want you to do a post-mortem and say, did I hire the wrong person? Or was it an opportunity in my own leadership that led to us not creating the outcome we would hope for? It's got to be one of those two things. If you hired the wrong person, what needs to change about your selection process? What needs to change about your due diligence? What did you learn from this experience that you're going to take into that next hiring decision? That's your obligation as the leader.
Welcome, everybody. We love having you guys here with us, and we're really excited to have Nate Spears, a great friend of mine and a very successful businessman, on our show today. Ike and I have enjoyed all of our guests, and with our focus to help you, especially the budding first-time entrepreneur, or even the one that's already VC funded but looking to improve their leadership skills, this is the show you need to be on, because Nate's an expert at leadership development. Let me tell you a little bit about Mr. Spears. So he started off, as usual, everyone goes through the School of Hard Knocks. He was actually at BMW in the financial services department when he and his partner, Rob, got together and decided, let's create a better solution. So they started the company ClearSource in 2008. And he'll tell you the journey along the way. But here's the important part. Not only has that company grown, it is now 1,500 employees big. So we're talking about an expert who knows how to work with different levels of management and leadership development. And that's going to be the focus of our discussion today, including having the fact that his employees are in Costa Rica, India, Philippines, and of course the US. And so the cultural issues there. With that said, Ike, if you've got any comments, we're really excited to have Nate Spears here on the show. Ike, any comments?
I'm looking forward to learning from you, Nate. You and I met, I think, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, the upstairs of Macy's in Utah, if I remember correctly. That had a profound impact on me. So I can't wait for you to share your wisdom with our audience, with the first time founders.
Thank you, Ike and Benoy. I appreciate the introduction. I'm thrilled to be with both of you today.
Thank you, Nate. And I'm going to look at you right now. One of the things that you've done that is extraordinary is in an industry where employee turnover is high. We're talking 60 to 80%. Your company is only averaging 30. That's 3x, 4x better than anybody else. You have such a focus on the individual and the internal development of staff. I know, Ike and I were talking just a moment ago, I know that when it comes to dealing with people, I'm like, ugh, get on with it, you idiot. I've already told you. How many times do we have to visit this again? And so I need to breathe. I need to be a coach. I need to be someone who has a little bit of the Instead, the automatic response is gritting of the teeth. So, with that said, please help us and give us a little bit of the journey of what you went through to develop this company and some of the struggles and trials, because we can always talk about success. The fact that you've even grew 300% during the pandemic says a lot, when everybody was clamping down, shutting down, borders were cut off, communication and systems were being taxed. So, what's the secret? What have you learned? Give us some of your insights.
To set the stage, I started my career in this industry at the age of 16. I was doing outbound cold call telemarketing, selling accidental death and dismemberment insurance to Sears card customers. Yeah. That's a job where you get hung up on and yelled at and sworn at a lot. And that experience taught me what it's like to sit in that seat. We've all heard the expression to feel like a number, to be easily replaceable, disposable. And no one wants to feel like that in any organization. And although the initial impetus for starting ClearSource in 2008 was this idea that typically business process outsource or call center companies are heavily focused on efficiency measures like cost per contact or average handle time, they, especially at that time, were much less focused on creating the exceptional customer experience that BMW was known for. And so there I found myself in this vendor operations management role, frustrated with the fact that we couldn't find a partner to help us create that exceptional customer experience. And for Rob and me, that was a light bulb moment. We thought to ourselves, there must be a way to enter this industry and create a model whereby we could deliver the BMW, Nordstrom, Zappos, Disney type customer experience on an outsourced basis. And that was a beautiful concept and reason to start a company. What I realized in December of 2017, looking back on that year, we had well over a 100% rate of attrition. And when I say attrition, I'm talking about employee turnover. And what I saw looking around the organization was essentially a wake of destruction as I realized we had not delivered on that same promise as pertaining to our people. I realized that year that despite being an Inc. 500 company in 2015, 16, 2017, that attrition issue was costing us $1 million a year. Something had to change. And that was the big wake-up call for me that shifted my focus a little bit to say, I don't want a company where anybody feels like a number. I don't want anybody to feel like they're easily replaced, that they're not important. But how do we create change? So I immediately looked around and I said, what messages are we sending to our people that say you're just a number? If you've ever worked in a call center, they have these attendance policies. They're kind of a 3 strikes, you're out policy. And we had those same kinds of policies. What I realized was that those policies apply to our frontline. Do they apply to our managers or HR department or workforce management? No, just to those frontline customer service representatives. And by applying that policy to one group of people and not the other, you create this us versus them mentality. You create division. Now, Patrick Lencioni, who wrote The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, once said that if you can get all of your people rowing in the same direction, you can dominate any industry at any time against any competition. I love that as a concept, and I realized that where we were creating division, we needed to reverse course to create unity. How does that start? It comes down essentially to how people feel about their jobs. See, Disney does a great job of creating an environment where people feel loyal to that brand. Why does Disney do such a great job with loyalty? Because they've realized that customer loyalty is rooted in emotion. We know this from Jim Collins, who wrote Good to Great. He was on a podcast with Brene Brown, once said that fundamentally, we as human beings operate at the level of feelings. Simon Sinek in Start With Why talks about how we make our decisions first emotionally, and then we justify those decisions with facts, figures, rationale, features, benefits, and analysis. So going back to that concept that customer loyalty is rooted in emotion, and we know that Disney over-engineers every single customer touch point to answer this one question. How does my guest feel about themselves when they ... when they get out of their car in the parking garage, or when they ride the tram from the parking garage to the front gate? How do they feel about themselves when they're buying their ticket for the day, or when they first step into the park? How do they feel about themselves when they're waiting in line or eating a churro? And they call these moments of truth, because if in those moments of truth, those feelings are positive, filled with excitement and anticipation, they know that guest will come back again and again and again. Now, here I am seeking to answer that same question for my most important customers, the ones that walk through that front door every day. And I'm asking myself, how do they feel about themselves when they're getting out of the car in the parking lot in front of the office? How do they feel about themselves when they first sit down in that chair to start their shift, or they put on that headset, or they're making themselves available for that first call? How do they feel about themselves when their team leader says, do you have a few minutes? I want to talk to you. These are my moments of truth. And if they feel discouraged, frustrated, unseen, unprepared, chances are they're going to stop missing work. And then one of those days, they're going to stop coming back. So if I want to better understand what it is that's getting in the way of our success, I've really got to ask myself, what's that emotional connection that this person has to what we do? Now, could you think of an industry where people feel more commoditized than at call centers? See, that's a big aha moment, because then it made it obvious to me that this was ripe for destruction, in the sense that we could create an environment where, instead of putting all of the onus on the individual to be successful, as we learn in the outward mindset, I could say, as far as I'm concerned, the problem is me. What could I do differently to create the kind of environment where this person could thrive? And I put on my gardener hat and I say, a seed is a seed is a seed is a seed. And whether that seed thrives is a function of moisture, temperature, soil quality. All of those things are things I influence as the leader. Could I create an environment wherein this person would thrive, and as a result of that, potentially give discretionary effort, which I call the effort that's above and beyond the bare minimum amount of effort required to avoid being fired? Again, in an industry where the large majority of people are only giving enough effort to avoid being fired, and sometimes not even that. And so, how do we create that internally driven incentive for people to give discretionary effort? And so, where then might that position us in an industry where I know everybody else feels commoditized? And so, kind of going back over our journey and the things I've learned, that's a little bit of a high level overview of some huge aha moments for me that then put me on a path toward what I've been passionate about now for the last 7-8 years, is just heavily focused on leadership.
Wow. Ike, don't you want him to be our manager, to be my boss?
Yeah, yes.
Right? My
It's
goodness.
amazing. Can I double click on one area? So this is amazing. Thank you. If there's so many areas to double click on this one, and then go into details. But tell us a little bit about, like, okay, in 2017, the moment you decided in your head you're gonna bring this change to the organization. This is 10 years after you started, so it's
Yep.
not so. Um, how did you implement that change? Because you probably had leadership already that wasn't thinking about this yesterday.
Yep.
You had to bring this idea. Like, you probably noticed some managers will never be in this mode, and some will cut it, will not cut it. Just tell us about that journey. The reason I'm asking, like, after my company had the VC money come in, we had more money. We were going to scale. We were going to hiring more, and I hired more managers as well. It was so hard to implement the methodologies that the CEO founder would come up, and then how to create that change throughout the organization. It's
Yeah.
like, can you teach us how you did that?
When I initially realized that we were sending messages to our people that say, you are an object, my first reaction was that we have to stop sending those messages. So the very first thing I did was I took that 3 strikes you're out of attendance policy and I threw it out the window.
Mm-hmm.
That was not met with resounding applause. My managers freaked out,
Mhm.
because the way that they saw it was I was taking away their ability to enforce rules and policy, that without such rules and policy, people would just do whatever they want. And That was a big aha moment for me, because what I realized was people tend to parent like they were parented, absent some other source of knowledge or training. And my managers were simply doing what was always done to them. They'd never seen another way. They grew up in the contact center environment where everybody was treated like an object. How could I expect them to do anything different? And what I realized was that the paradigm shift that needed to occur to go from an environment of control and force to one of autonomy and discretionary effort, that would require a lot of time and patience and a completely different approach. Going back to the reference earlier to Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why, I had to first help everybody understand why the change. And there's a motto or a phrase that I use oftentimes in our organization, which is, if you haven't heard it 7 times, you haven't heard it once. And it required, at least initially, a lot of repetition, stories, examples, in order to help that knowledge move throughout the individual. The best way I can describe what I'm talking about there is that people may hear something and I say, the knowledge sometimes goes in one ear and out the other. We retain nothing, or we might retain a little bit of it. So the knowledge goes in one ear and I start to maybe have some understanding. So I say the knowledge moves from here to here. What I'm trying to do is get the knowledge to move from, I'm pointing to my head, I understand it, down to, I'm pointing at my heart, I believe it. How do we know when someone believes it? It is manifest in their actions. Are they acting on that knowledge? Are they doing something differently? That's something I can observe.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes, I have people who say, yes, I will do something, and then they don't do the thing. And I say, okay, maybe they understand what it is I'm asking them to do, but it's not yet entered their true belief system. With patience, I go back to, if they haven't heard it 7 times, they haven't heard it once. And so we create systems of crystal clear expectations and healthy accountability. My responsibility as the leader is to set those crystal clear expectations. That doesn't sound like, here's what I expect you to do. And at ClearSource, we have a tool that we call the role definition. The role definition has 3 parts. The first is, what is the purpose of your role? And what I do in that section is I tie the role to our mission objective, which has 3 parts: happy clients, healthy financials, and successful staff, defined loosely as everybody has a fundamental right to go home at the end of the day and honestly say, I love my job.
Mm-hmm.
So we say that's the vehicle that helps us achieve our mission of helping everyone in the company to go where they want to go. In other words, experience what they want to experience, have what they want to have, and become who they want to become. So we have mission and the vehicle, happy clients, healthy financial, successful staff. And so every single role in the company, its purpose ties to happy clients, healthy financial, successful staff. I don't care if you're an analyst in workforce management, or you're a business development representative, or you're a customer service representative. Every role supports that collective goal. And the next part of that role definition is, how does the job get done? I list out what are the core tasks for your seat that support that purpose. And for a customer service representative, I might say things like, create an exceptional customer experience, defined as only providing accurate information and following established processes, and minimizing the time and effort that the customer has to spend on getting their issue resolved, and creating a connection with that customer between them and the brand that you represent. I say that's an exceptional customer
Mm-hmm.
experience. And so now I'm putting the tasks in there. And then the last part of the role definition is, I list out the most important KPIs, key performance indicators, whether those are behavioral KPIs or results KPIs, that tell us what success looks like so that there's no ambiguity
Yeah.
around whether or not the person is doing a quote unquote good job.
Can I
And
ask? I got
please.
to interrupt because it's such a good sequence. I'm going to lose the question. When the frontline managers or any one of them balked at the removal of the three strikes out rule, because following up on Ike, how many repeats, 70 times did you have to reinforce? Did it take 3 years to go through the whole socialization sequence? How,
Yeah.
just the actual story of how that went is fascinating.
You can't take away the tool that everybody's using to do their job without replacing it with something
Yeah.
else.
Hmm.
And I remember it was probably 3 months after I tossed that policy, I was having a conversation with David Williams, who, anyway, Dave Williams, and we were sitting down, we were having a conversation about this one point of frustration, which is I'm teaching these things, but people aren't doing them. And what David suggested was, and this is in the era now, uh, we were having this conversation as kind of COVID was kicking off. And so we're a few years into this process of changing everybody's mindset. I'm saying, David, I'm spending all this time. It's not working. What do I need to do differently? And he said, my recommendation would be to sit down with each person one-on-one, teach the process, have them show you, and then teach them, and have them show you, and have them teach them and show you, and create individual accountability. It required a lot of work. But what I was doing in that process was creating a culture, because if I can win over a few key leaders enough that that knowledge goes from I heard it to I understand it to now I believe it as evidenced by my action, then the second generation, the people who are being led by those leaders, they're now hearing it for the first time in the sense that they're seeing their leader put these things into action. In Good to Great, Jim Collins talks about the flywheel, essentially applying the same amount of pressure over and over and over again in order to get that big flywheel to spin faster and faster and faster. His metaphor was an answer to the question, when did a good company become great?
Hmm.
And the founders all said, well, there wasn't a specific moment where we went from good to great. It was the consistent application of correct
Hmm.
principles over a long period of time. Now, that requires an incredible amount of patience. I like to say it requires the long view. As a founder, I have the luxury of being the shareholder in a bootstrapped organization where no one gets to tell me what I can and can't do, and I'm not beholden to quarterly earnings reports. Think about that for a moment. Nope, nobody can tell me that I can't take 6 months or a year to really ensure that an initiative can be successful. I love that about my role, is that unlike most middle level managers that go to a conference and get a great idea and bring it back to their organization only to have it die on the vine, a victim of quarterly earnings reports, I can instead say, we're choosing to take the long view, we're choosing to invest in the long run. And so we're going to consistently apply this over and over and over. Now,
You answered, yeah, you answered it because you said it. Patience, for we are so used to let's get results. Oh, this guy is taking too long to get on board. Jettison him. He's not part of the culture, we say. But
yeah,
it's really our own impatience to get the results, right, Ike? Otherwise, you wouldn't have asked that question.
Oh,
Because
yeah, because it's I think it's easy to find excuses. You can, like, even like if you have to resolve it within yourself, even when you're bootstrapped, you can say, "Oh my God, I need cash. I can't just do this anymore," and then I'm gonna move on. Like I have my family to feed. Or if you have investors with the board meetings every 3 months, oh my God, I have to explain to them that I'm spending 55% of my time on changing my culture, not working on the product or customer acquisition. You know what I mean? So
Hmm.
the founder has to find that strength in themselves to be able to do that. I think regardless of whether you have VC or bootstrapped.
Absolutely. I think ultimately it comes down to whether you are bought into the principle enough to actually let that be the guide for your day-to-day actions. We talk a lot about core values. Are they aspirational, or are they things that you
Hmm.
actually exhibit?
Yeah.
And I think for us, it comes down to me. There's some concepts in Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink where I really have to take ownership and say, it comes down to, if somebody else isn't doing it, whose fault is that? As you said, our tendency is excuses. It's to point the finger and say, this person is the problem. But the problem with that viewpoint is that as long as I'm pointing my finger at you, I'm essentially saying that I am powerless to do anything about it because I necessarily have to wait for you to change. I don't
Hmm.
control you. That's terrible. Right? Nobody wants to be in a situation where you can't do anything about it. And so I say, as far as I'm concerned, the problem is me. What that means to me is as far as I'm concerned, the solution is in my hands. I can do something different to create the outcome that I'm looking for. People say then, okay, how much effort is a reasonable amount of effort to get that person to change? I get that question all the time.
Yeah.
I say, that's up to you. Gary Vaynerchuk would rightfully, in my opinion, say, once you know that you've got the wrong person, let them go.
Uh-huh.
Why? We say, I don't want to be the bad guy that runs around firing everybody. I say, well, you got two options, right? Um, you could keep them on in a role in which they will never be successful, which makes your clients miserable, your team miserable, and that person will be miserable coming into a job every day that they will never be successful. And yet, because of their own fears, they're afraid maybe to go and look for something else somewhere else.
Yeah.
And sometimes inviting them forcefully to undertake that search can be the right thing to do. But here's what I require of my managers. When you let somebody go, I want you to do a post-mortem and say, did I hire the wrong person? Or was it an opportunity in my own leadership that led to us not creating the outcome we would hope for? It's got to be one of those two things. If you hired the wrong person, what needs to change about your selection process? What needs to change about your due diligence? What did you learn from this experience that you're going to take into that next hiring decision? That's your obligation as the leader. If it wasn't a hiring issue, what needs to change about your leadership practices? And oftentimes it's that we're afraid to give direct feedback. We're afraid to set crystal clear expectations because we don't want to hurt feelings.
We're afraid people are not going to like us.
We're afraid that we're not going to be liked.
Yeah.
I was reading an article once, and most of the article was kind of worthless, but there was a paragraph in it that really stuck out to me. The paragraph was delineating niceness and kindness. And it said that our niceness, our people pleasing, comes from a place of wanting to be liked in order to address our self esteem needs. And so we go around tiptoeing. We are pleasant, agreeable, don't want to rock the boat. Kindness comes from a place of desiring the other person's success, and that's the priority. And the analogy that I like to use is everybody's had a friend who walks around sometimes with their zipper down or spinach in their teeth. And it may feel a little awkward to say something, but because you truly care about them and you want them to be successful, you say, hey, your zipper's down, you have spinach in your teeth. That's the kind of benchmark of a
Yeah.
true friend. And so there's a mantra that I repeat, I know if I'm going to give somebody some challenging feedback, I say to myself as I'm thinking about them and I'm preparing for that conversation, your success is more important to me than whether or not you like me. Brene Brown said, clear is kind, unclear is unkind. And so I say, kindness, your success is more important to me than whether or not you like me. And so I'm going to give you the information that you need to be successful rather than make it about my own self-esteem issues.
This is awesome because Bino and I are smiling because we use the same kindness versus niceness all the time. So it's spot on.
Yeah.
In this sequence as you're going through, because we got first time founders listening in, how did you divide the role between your partnership between Rob and you? Because clearly there's got to be a division of labor, specialization, focus. Because at a certain point there could be things that you want to initiate and he's going to say that's taking too long, we got to hit the numbers.
Yeah.
That's too long and too soft, we got to go. Were there any of those instances, friction points, and how? Hey, look at that. I'm sure there weren't any. And how did you resolve? And because partnerships are fraught with risk, they
Yes.
absolutely are. How did you do it?
Going back to Jim Collins and Good to Great, he says, first who, then what? First who, then what? It wasn't a hard decision to get into business with Rob because Rob checked that first who box, meaning I knew that we could be aligned on vision, and that was important. But what I will say is that from the beginning of our partnership, we, for a long time, felt like two people dancing with their left feet, right? It was a lot of trying to figure out who was responsible for what.
Mm-hmm.
And it took us a few years to naturally settle into that division of labor that you're referring to. And one of the things that really helped was the book Traction by Gino Wickman, who did Entrepreneur Operating System. And in there, he goes into a lot of stories about great founding duos like Steve Woz and Steve Jobs and Ballmer and Gates. And he tries to paint this picture of, a founding duo where you have a visionary and an integrator. And it doesn't mean that the integrators doesn't help with vision for concepts or market place fit or anything like that. But they come together, they reach alignment on vision, and you tend to find that one person's heavier on vision, the other one tends to be heavier on integration.
Mm-hmm.
And so you create that complement. Now, it's very critical that each of those two partners, and I love partnerships because they bring so much strength and complementary abilities, but they're each willing to bring their full selves into that relationship.
Mm.
Now, in a past life, I used to be heavy in banking and finance, and I was a program manager at an industrial loan corporation bank in Salt Lake City. And I had a compliance manager counterpart. My role as a program manager was to advocate for the clients that utilize this industrial loan corporation bank to issue financial products under that bank charter. These were fintech companies that needed a bank charter for loan origination as part of their lending products. My job, again, as the program manager, was to advocate for those clients to make sure that everything that they needed could be done. I had a compliance manager counterpart whose job was to protect the bank from regulatory risk. Now, we both worked for the bank, and so obviously it's in my interests to ensure that the bank is protected from regulatory risks. And I had in my compliance manager counterpart this guy named Scott, who was great at his job. He was very well versed on compliance regulation. And so he and we could go toe to toe and have the best debates, even raised voices, pounding on tables if needed. But we had healthy conflict where we were, as Adam Grant says, working together to solve a problem that's sitting over there. It wasn't me versus Scott. Okay. So we had these healthy debates, and it was amazing. And we always, in my opinion, we reached the best solution for the clients and the bank. One day, Scott, deservedly so, took an opportunity with another bank, and he was replaced by somebody else. And the new guy came in. I had this reputation for being able to push hard. And unfortunately for all of us, the new guy, he struggled with that. He wanted to be nice and agreeable. And what I realized was, as we started working together, he would fold whenever I would advocate for a position. He would say, "All right, Nate, like, you seem to know what you're talking about, whatever you say." But the problem was, is I didn't want, in my advocacy for our clients, to put the bank at risk. And so I started having to dial back how forceful I was advocating for certain positions because he wasn't pushing back hard enough. And now we see this dynamic of a great partnership where you're willing to fight in order to achieve the best outcomes.
This is right along the lines of what I was going to ask you ultimately. That also tells you this new person who took over not only was unsure, unconfident, potentially, and you were the respected old guard and with a reputation.
Yeah.
And if you think about so many business situations, it always comes down to the ability of the individual to represent who they are, to know who they are,
Yes.
to make an impact in the organization or the business. But if they're insecure, or they come with baggage, or they come with fear, it makes it really hard. With that number of people that you've got in the organization, the number of managers and leaders you've trained, how do you overcome this whole issue of maybe they were abused in a former organization and all they know is, whatever the boss says is just nod your head and say yes, instead of truly bringing their true selves together. How do you address that? What have you learned?
Well, and what I want to do is I want to take that even a step further and say, when you're introducing these concepts across cultures,
Mm,
here we are, we're operating in India, Philippines, Costa Rica, US. In Malcolm Gladwell's book, I think it was Tipping Point, where he refers to the Hofstede Power Distance Index, which essentially is the level to which people in the lower echelons of a given society see themselves as belonging in that place in the stratification of socioeconomic status. And not only do they see themselves as belonging there, they say, that's where I'm supposed to stay. And where you are above me, that's where you belong. And there are societies like this that score very high on this index. The Philippines is one of those.
Mm-hmm.
And the challenge that we have is that nodding and saying, yes, boss, to whatever I say is the expected behavior. But oftentimes the resulting action is not quite in line. And in other societies where people believe that they have, a place at any table, there's a lot more willing to provide dissenting opinions and have conversations about it, and we work toward a resolution. So if you go back to Patrick Lencioni's book, The Five Dysfunctions of a Team, he talks about how the root dysfunction is a lack of trust, which then leads to an avoidance of healthy conflict. I was referencing that a moment ago with, it's not you versus me, it's you and I working together to solve a problem that's sitting over there. And so if we go back to how do we resolve that trust issue, it's creating an environment of essentially psychological safety where I'm inviting dissent and I'm not quashing it every time somebody provides a dissenting opinion. Now, the tendency is, if I believe I'm right, to convince everybody else of my viewpoint.
yeah.
How can we as leaders set aside our need to be right,
Mm-hmm.
put that in the passenger seat, in order to be open to other points of view? It's challenging. Why? Because of fear. I'm afraid that if I make the wrong decision, that at the end of the day, everybody's livelihoods will be impacted, or I lose, or whatever else. And so a lot of people in the founder position say, well, if we do what I think we ought to do, then I'm okay with whatever outcome. But if I do what you think we ought to do, I don't want to create a position where there's resentment and blame and all of those things. And so we tend to gravitate towards what we think is right.
Uh,
And that's a skill that we really have to develop and focus on over time, is showing our people that we trust them enough to at least allow us to be open to other possibilities.
Could you simulate a conversation in which you have had to talk to, whether it be an individual or a culturally trained individual? It's okay. A real practical, can you just almost use word for word? Because that'll
Yep.
give all of us, never mind our listeners, but for me and Ike, how did you do it?
Yep.
Yeah.
I was in a round table. I'll just refer to a very specific
Yeah.
situation where exactly what you're talking about came up. And I was in a leadership meeting with a group of leaders predominantly from the Philippines.
Mm.
And we were having a conversation about KPIs and the root cause of certain KPIs. And in that conversation, I remember asking them, what's getting in the way of our ability to achieve these results? And the responses I got were very generic. And so here I am, I'm trying to dig deeper and say,
Mm.
what's really going on? And I called on someone specifically, and I just said, and let's pretend that her name is Jane. I said, Jane, what's really getting in the way? And she just kind of looked at me with this blank look and didn't want to say anything. I said, Jane, why aren't you saying anything? She says, well, I don't want to say the wrong thing. So,
Mm.
well, what do you mean by that? She said, well, even if I know what it is that you're asking me for, unless I'm 100% sure, I don't want to say the wrong thing. I said, well, why not? She said, because I've seen at other companies I've worked for, giving the wrong answer makes you look stupid, incompetent, and potentially puts your job at risk. And so here we have this huge fear of being a part of the conversation because someone might say the wrong thing. And if they do, they'll get shamed or yelled at or even worse, fired. Now, the important thing for me to recognize is that I'm inviting people into my organization who have come from other companies where that was
Mhm.
the leadership style, and they're bringing all this trauma, all this fear into this conversation. Of course, it's going to take them a while.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I've got a lot of bad habits to help them unlearn, some trauma that needs to be healed. And I can't do that unintentionally. I have to be very intentional about recognizing that they're bringing this baggage into my organization and essentially overcompensate for that by creating psychological safety so that they can provide these dissenting opinions. And so, what I started to do, this was my very specific tactic, is whenever I would ask a question, I would say gold stars for wrong answers. Gold stars for wrong answers is if you give me a wrong answer, I'm going to say, high five, gold star, let's celebrate that. Here's why. Anybody can give me a right answer. That doesn't require courage. It takes bravery and courage to give a wrong answer. And so I salute the wrong answers. Okay.
Beautiful.
Nice.
Hi.
That's how we
Yep.
intentionally overcome that fear of participation.
I'm learning tons. Absolutely light bulb moments for me. Fabulous. Wonderful. And did you have successive tiers of training to take people through from overcoming fear to communicating with clarity to challenging the system
Mm-hmm.
where they got more and more comfortable with psychological safety because you created it, right?
Yes.
With sort of a tiered system. of getting them through different levels, or
Yes.
just one big meeting? Yeah.
Well, I want to give you another very specific story of a principle that we teach in our organization, and I just call it the 5-step process for getting anyone to do anything. And the first step, and that I'll just give you a high-level overview. The first step is I explain to the person how they benefit when they do the thing. So we start with why. Step 1 is make sure that they understand the why and what needs to be done. Step 2 is saying, will you do it? If accountability is a positive term that simply describes whether, in the eyes of others, we have kept our commitments, then necessarily there first has to have been a commitment for accountability to exist.
Yeah.
And yet, so often we assume commitment simply because I'm the boss and you're my direct report. And I say, it's not a hard ask, it's not a heavy lift to just say, will you do the thing? Step 3 is the accountability itself, which is nothing more than, did you do what you said you would do? It's easy, right? As Yoda said, do or do not, there is no try. It's not a maybe, it's not an I tried, it's not an almost. I simply say, okay, so is that a yes or a no? Right?
Mhm.
Did you do what you said you would do? Step 4, if they did what they said they would do, we praise, appreciate, and recognize them for keeping that commitment. At many organizations, we praise, appreciate, and recognize the person at the top of the performance list. I would rather have an organization filled with people who are keeping their commitments. So that's what we praise, appreciate, and recognize. Step 5, if you didn't do what you said you would do, I get super curious and I ask why. And I dig deep to try and understand. Is it that you didn't know how to do the thing? Is it that you didn't want to? Is it that you didn't have the ability to? And there are remedies for each of those if I get to the true root cause, and then I take you by the hand to overcome any obstacles in your way. So we call that the 5-step process. And I had a leader in our organization who was a couple of levels below me on the organizational chart, and she needed me to do something. And she did that typical thing, shoots me an email and says, will you do this thing? Brushed it off. She follows up, brushed that off. And then I gave her some feedback. I said, Val, there's this 5-step process that we teach in leadership training. You've been through leadership training, so I'm sure you remember it, but you're not using it on me. I would love to invite you to use this 5-step process on me. Now, there's obviously some fear there because, right?
Yeah.
How many mid-level managers are excited to hold a founder and president to a specific task? Because the assumption is they're busy and they're more important or all these other things. She says, okay, I'm going to do it. So she set a date and time. She got my commitment. She followed these steps. 1, 2, 3. Date and time came around. She said, Nate, did you do what you said you would do? I said, no. She kept asking why. She said, why not? And we got to the real root cause of the issue. And as you can imagine, and we're doing this conversation virtually, as she's doing to me what I taught her to do, my head is gradually like shifting off the side of the screen as I'm feeling guilt, which is that feeling we get that nudges our behavior into alignment with who we want to be, and it's healthy. And I'm feeling this guilt, and I'm like, oh my gosh, Nate, right? Like, you need to do it. And so we recommitted. Next date comes around, she follows up. I was proud to say that I had done it.
Mm-hmm.
But more importantly, the shift that occurred in me is that from that point forward, every time Val invited me to make a commitment, gosh darn it, I was going to do it. I was never going to let her down again because I want to be a person who keeps my commitments. I invited her to our all leader meeting and I interviewed her in order to share that story with the rest of our leaders. I wanted to know what it felt like in her shoes as she's asking me why, again and again, I didn't do what I said I would do, why, and how she could do that without laughing or feeling embarrassed or trying to let me off the hook. She was dead serious. What was interesting is what happened next. She had a team member who saw, oh my gosh, my leader is holding Nate, founder and COO, accountable. Now, the team members in the Philippines, where that kind of behavior is not accepted at most places. You do not question authority. Okay. So here they see she's holding me accountable. He's like, maybe I can do it. He starts doing that cross-departmentally. Oh my gosh, this is working. I'm getting results. People are actually doing now what I need them to do. And then what happened next? His peers saw him having success with that process. The same people who watched the interview with Val and Nate, that wasn't enough. It wasn't until they saw their peer doing it that it really started to take off.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Okay. And so then this kind of grassroots teaching through example, and you see the knowledge going from I heard it to I understand it to, oh my gosh, because JR did it, I can do it because he's like me. And then we see then this is taking hold and people are actually seeing results and starting to do what needs to be done. And so going back to, again, how do we proactively create that environment? It takes a little bit of vulnerability to stand up in front of every leader in the company and say, I, Nate, did not do what I said I would do. And that was hard and embarrassing. But I'll tell you, it changed everything when I could be held accountable to being who I say I am.
Yeah. But isn't that what the founders or the coaches do? Like, if the founder is the coach for the entire company, you have to constantly look for opportunities. Say, how can I turn this into a teaching moment for that employee and for everybody else, right? And that's what you did. You utilized the opportunity to create this environment and distribute it to everybody.
Yeah. For me, it's finding those, what I'll call ambassadors of the model. And I recognize I'll teach 20 people and one of them will run with it. And that's okay.
Yeah, makes sense.
Because that one that runs with it, that carries that flame, they are being seen by all their peers. And the peers are looking at that person and saying, look what they're doing. And now they'll start to believe.
Cool.
It's not enough for them to hear me say it, no matter how eloquently or with what examples I use. When they start to see someone doing it who is like, essentially like them, you say, okay, now I see, now I can do it. And when they see what it looks like and they see the results, they start running with it too. And so that's really going back to the conversation earlier about patience and allowing this culture to develop over time. And that when someone joins the company, it's easier for them to assimilate because it's not a video, it's how I see everyone else doing it.
It's
And
true.
they start following.
True. I got to ask this question. It's a two-part. Number one, you've got different cultures that you're balancing on this very topic. Does that mean that you have to tailor differently? And then related to that, how did you, as a human being, change? Not just in the realization that 100% turnover in 2017 is not acceptable. How did you have to change yourself in order to get the success that you're having now that you didn't when you started the business? How did you evolve? Two
Yeah.
parts. I know we have too many
I was
questions.
going to ask that question.
So the first question of tailoring it to the cultures, many of the things I've discussed are, I believe, common to human beings in the sense that people want to, actually, before I say it, I'm going to go to Patrick Lencioni's book, The Truth About Employee Engagement, where he talks about the three drivers of employee dissatisfaction. The first is anonymity. People don't know who I am. The second is irrelevance. I don't know how what I do matters. The third is immeasurement. I don't know how I'm performing against the expectation. We go back to crystal clear expectations plus healthy, consistent accountability plus freedom equals success, engagement, and innovation. And we're talking about human principles. Show me a culture where people don't care about being seen, or they don't care about the relevance of their work, or they don't care about how success is measured. So I'm going to just go out on a limb and say, I think that those are common principles. And when those become the core principles of the leadership program that we teach at ClearSource, we then start to go back to how do I apply, or how do I provide examples of the application of these concepts in a way that makes sense to this person? And I can tell you, I don't know the answer. But if I can find one person in that office in India, or a couple of people in the Philippines who really are picking up what I'm putting down, and then can then lead in a way that their peers in that culture see how it's done, then the translation is kind of, in a sense, happening for me. Because so much of it is, I'm looking at this person that looks like me, sounds like me, that understands my culture. And as I'm seeing them do it, now the underlying concept is coming out in specific actions that are, in a sense, training me how to do the thing. And my hope, again, going back to, if you haven't heard it 7 times, you haven't heard it once. We have that new employees coming in. Their leader is exhibiting these principles. How much more likely is that new employee, when someday they become a leader and go through leadership training, how much more likely are they to exhibit these principles when it's how they were led?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I care about. I want to see the 5th, 6th, 7th generations running with this. Again, long view. I'm not expecting perfection tomorrow, but I don't want to be having the same conversation a year from now. So let's keep pushing that flywheel. How did I change? The very first book that all leaders read at ClearSource is called The Outward Mindset by the Arbinger Institute. They're perhaps more well-known for The Anatomy of Peace, but I love The Outward Mindset. It's a collection of stories that teach us how to become alive to and interested in the objectives, challenges, and needs of others. We are in societies that are incredibly divisive. Read any news article. We're seemingly incredibly divisive and divided. And this perspective taking is so critical, where there is so much us versus them within a society, within a company, within even a family, right? And what I realized was I had to get real with what I wanted. And to the extent that I saw the success of my organization as being my primary driver or definition of who I am, then things were out of alignment. Because that's not who I am. I don't need the company to be bigger to be enough. My view of myself as being good enough, of having enough, that comes from me. So I welcome every new hire to our company every week. We have a 90-minute welcome to ClearSource. And I go through why we started the company. I talk about what each of the 5 core values means to me. I share the ways that I see ClearSource as being different from other companies that they've worked at in the past. And I wrap up my presentation with a really big caveat. And it has to do with the idea that the source of all frustration is an unmet expectation. And my fear is that in this presentation, I have made our company look like this nirvana, this utopia, this wonderful place where everybody will be happy every day. And I have to tell them, it's not going to be like that. Okay? It's not going to be like that. It's going to be what you make it. And I tell them, I say, the secret I want to let you in on is that you don't work for me. You and I, we work for you. You have so much power. You are the CEOs of your own small businesses, and this company, as the employer, is really just your biggest customer. And what are you selling us? Your time, your effort, your expertise, your know-how. In exchange for what? I derive my joy and fulfillment out of helping our people to go where they want to go. I love seeing them do great things in their lives outside of ClearSource. That's my why.
Mhm.
And so I invite them. I say, look, it's not going to be perfect every day, but to borrow the phrase, be the change that you want to see in this world. Take the great things that you've learned in your careers, add them to what you're doing, make it your own, right? And what can we together accomplish? I say, this vision that I've shared with you, it's not where we are today. It's where we hope to be someday, but we're closer to that vision being a reality today than we've ever been before. Will you help us? Will you take part in this process and continuing to move that needle, recognizing that someday here at ClearSource, you might have a leader who's going to say something that's going to hurt your feelings and you're going to get mad and maybe think about quitting. But will you help us? Will you give that feedback? Will you help us to bring our behavior into alignment with who we want to be as a company? And in my mind, that's the why. So how did I change? It was a shift from this isn't even about me. This is about something that has taken on over the last 15 years a life of its own. I love the analogy of a company being like raising a child. And now I have a 15-year-old, right?
Mm.
Um, as a person with kids aged 20, 13, and 6, I've been able to individually watch them make these transitions. And so in my mind, I know what it's like to have a 15-year-old. And because I know what 20 looks like, it's beautiful. I love my 20-year-old. And I love how she has become this amazing human being. And I see that potential. I see our company continuing to evolve toward that as this culture becomes something that's so strong that as people join the company, they assimilate. And so, who am I? I'm someone who surrenders to that principle, to that process. I don't need to force it. I'm just teaching principles and doing my very best to keep my behavior into alignment with those principles and then just let it do its job.
Wow.
Hey, Nate, this is awesome. Thank you. Can you expand on exactly what you said to the founders? Like let me explain what I mean. I talked to the ones uh, that they're students. They are trying to come up with the ideas and they're looking for perfection. They're
Yeah.
doing these researches for 100 years because they don't want to dip their toes unless it's like absolutely true. And then
Yep.
I get these founders where they're pre-revenue seed, like they're just dipping their toes into building the software and trying to get to the product market fit maybe. And then
Mhm.
there's the ones that raise money, 5 million, 10 million. They have 20 employees, and they're they 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 are this is their first time doing it, right?
Yeah.
So think about all, like, what would you tell them, because they are in the process of becoming you, but they need a few years ahead of them, and it's filled with fears and excitement and conquering the world, but also challenges at the same time with working with people. How do you tell them to improve like you have? Because you talk about the books you read, hopefully they're getting the subliminal message behind the scenes. Like every book you read, every lesson you learn from interaction or a book or another leader adds added to you, right? That's you are the compilation of that. But how should they manage that? How should they think about that?
Yeah. Um, I'm reminded of the quote attributed to Abraham Lincoln, where he said, "Give me 6 hours to chop down the tree, and I'll spend the first 4 hours sharpening my axe." As founders, and I think back to the early days of starting the company, doing, 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 doing. And a few years ago, I was at an event. It was an entrepreneur organization event where they had Dave Crenshaw, who's an author and speaker in Utah. And he came in, he was speaking to us, and he says, as founders, you tend to see yourselves in this really dark tunnel, and you're hustling, you're grinding it out, head down, just working your butt off every single day. And at the end of that tunnel, you see this light, and you think, someday I'm going to get there. Everything's going to be amazing. And my ship will come in. He said, there's life happening all around you every single day. And I think to create additional capacity for yourself, he said, you can step out of that tunnel anytime you want. And it doesn't mean that you're giving up on that dream or that goal, but it's recognizing that you got to recharge yourself to create for yourself the capacity to do these things. And for me, that means learning. When I'm reading books, three things happen. Number one, I learn what the book has to teach me, so I'm getting new concepts. Number two, I get ideas that have nothing to do with what I'm reading, but because of the space I'm in mentally, those ideas are helping me solve problems that may have nothing to do with the concept in the book, but that are things that I need, downloads I'm getting. The third thing is I simply feel more energized and motivated when I'm reading than when I'm not. And so it's prioritizing that time for reading in order to keep that axe sharp. Okay. The other thing I'll say is I'm a terrible budgeter. I have never had budgeting discipline. And so I've been very fortunate for our company to be bootstrapped because why? You can't spend money that you don't have. And one of the things that I feel like is very alluring about VC money is that you see it as catapulting this concept into market and you're very excited about it. We've had clients in our company who are VC backed, and it's amazing to watch when your attitude, your consumer spending optimism is very high and it's spend and do. I get that, right? So I think if you're going to be VC backed, it's bringing someone. If it's not you, make sure you got someone on your team that's creating accountability around financial discipline, so that you're not creating a situation where you're exposed to catastrophic risk. As founders, we've got to be really great at risk management. I'm not risk averse, but I'm also not stupid. And so it's not putting myself in a situation where I'm exposing myself to catastrophic risk. I love the concept of fast fail. The motto that we use is perfect is the enemy of done. As perfectionists, we want everything to be right. At the same time, we find ourselves building the train while it's rolling down the tracks. Not easy. And so it's understanding when something's not working, don't hold on to it. That's so hard to throw good money after good, to stop throwing good money after bad because of it. Whatever idea that I had that we were going with is a reflection on me and my competence. And I'm not allowing myself to let go of it. And we're continuing to run with it way beyond its expiration date. That can really hurt and set you back. And I'm not talking about just concepts. Sometimes I'm talking about people. How much longer have we kept someone on past that expiration date because we're friends or because we're blaming ourselves for their performance, whatever the reason might be. And so surrendering to the process for me means allowing myself to let go of the things that need to be let go of. And if it's people, if it's concepts, whatever it is, I've got no pride of authorship, ownership. We go back to what do the results say? And if you can be objective and use make data-driven decisions, it's so critical as you're going through that founding and growth process.
Wow.
Thank you.
Wow, Ike. What do you think?
Yeah, it's awesome.
We've run out of time and we have so many questions still. Fantastic. Thank you.
We haven't even gotten to the point where how motorcycle riding helps founders calm and then be in a state of,
Bliss.
nirvana. But
Yeah.
maybe next time.
Wow. That's another thing we have in common. But that's a valid point, right? That many of our tunnels of effort forget to enjoy the journey and to breathe and put the oxygen mask on. Because we're out there trying to prove our point because our value is on the line.
Yeah.
If we don't do this, we're toast.
From my own experience, we probably spent the first 5 years losing money. The next 5 years breaking even. The most recent 5 years have been great. That talk about stepping out of the tunnel was at around that 9-10 year mark. Interesting that when I finally took the time to put on my oxygen mask, lo and behold, our growth really started taking off because I was bringing a better version of myself to my leadership role.
Fantastic. Perfectly timed.
I can relate to that so much.
Oh my goodness. The amount of time that Ike and I have spent on motorcycles just to be able to breathe and clear the air. We need it. I will say this, we've all got our journeys and many stories. Yours are fantastic. I can tell that you have an abnormal advantage, Nate. You not only remember the books you read, I don't even remember just 3 weeks ago, or what was that again? But your ability to implement them is just stupendous. Hats off to you. Love the journey. Yeah. And love the caring and coming down to the micro level of now not just addressing every new employee with an onboarding presentation by yourself, but you continue to even make that change agent occur within you first, then you can manifest that outside and let the time sequence evolve as needed, but put something in place and not be too impatient. I learned that. Long view, the long game. I've learned lots. Ike, anything as we close
All,
up?
all set. All set. Thank you, Ned. It was awesome.
My pleasure.
Any last minute advice to founders?
Um, you know, I go back to that presentation you just mentioned a moment ago, and one of the reasons that I love doing it, I love it for me, is because I get to remind myself every single week why we started the company, our core values, how I see us as being different. And I have to ask myself, as I'm looking at my behavior on a weekly basis, am I a hypocrite, or am I acting authentically to those things that I talk about every Monday? And that's an opportunity to kind of check myself and bring my own behavior into alignment. I think getting clear on who you are, why you're doing what you're doing, and then do your actions reflect that from a place of authenticity? One of my big themes for my personal life going into 2024 was to eliminate moments of self-betrayal where I do things because I think it's what others expect or want me to do, not because of my own desires or who I am. And it can be really scary when you've got other people's money that you're dealing with and you have other people's livelihoods on the line. And I would just say, stay true to who you are, check in with yourself, make sure that you're not self-betraying, and then ensure that your actions are aligning with your words. You do that, people will trust you, because if you are out of alignment, if you're not acting from a place of integrity, then your lack of integrity will be betrayed by your word choice, your body language, your facial expressions, your tone of voice. Everybody will see it from a mile away. So take the safe route, be true, be authentic, and surrender to the process, right? Follow true principles and it'll take you where you want to go.
I feel 10 pounds lighter just listening to Nate today. Thank you. Thank you so much. And Ike, I'm sure you'd agree, that was fantastic. And with that said, to our listeners and viewers, we hope you can see why Nate Spears is our hero. I said at the start that he would help us understand how leadership principles can be taught. He emulates it, he walks the talk, and he's able to grow now a very successful business, which doesn't show any signs of stopping, because every week he's going to make sure that he's aligned with his true self. And so, hey, forward this to other people, share it, like it, do whatever, so that other people can hear what Nate has to share so that they can also benefit. With that said, thank you, everyone. Until next week, next time, see you soon.